This next piece of news is interesting. So Shams Charania, as we're recording, reported that the favorites to land Jimmy Butler as of now are Phoenix or Golden State. Memphis is also kind of lurking per Mark Stein, but Mark Stein and Jake Fisher also report, Grant, that the Pelicans would build a package around Brandon Ingram to get him. We're going to get into a potential package, what it would look like. There's some complexity here. New Orleans still isn't going to pay the tax this season even if they get Jimmy Butler. So they would have to send out probably like, I don't know, 51 million or a little bit more to duck the tax. There are also profiles like 30, 31 million under the tax next season without like a Brandon Ingram or a Jimmy Butler salary or their own first round pick. So you have to kind of like, well, what are they doing with their books moving forward? Is this, I guess, can you explain the interest in Jimmy Butler to me if you're New Orleans?
I bumped on that in a big way when I read that. It's really hard to justify. I think it can only be as part of a deal in which you are getting off other salaries you don't want, in addition to just kind of solving the Ingram conundrum. And you're also like, you're ducking the tax this year. That's a priority. Even in those circumstances, I think any deal you put together is like the sell is pretty hard for New Orleans, or harder for than it would be for the other teams we would talk about in a hypothetical, right? Because just like you want Butler, why? Like this year is a lost cause. It's zero value this year, other than if you get out of the tax. And then what do you want to happen over the summer? Like, do you want him on the books for 50? Do you want to see him walk for nothing? It might be that. I don't know.
Is it? And I just, that player option is so high. It's not even a situation, because we talked about this before we were recording and I stopped us because we should talk about it here. Are you just kind of assuming that the market might beat him into James Harden type submission, where Harden didn't get anywhere near, he got 2 years and 70 this past summer from the Clippers. And so Jimmy Butler at 2 years and 70, if that's like the deal, even if it's a 1+1 is more palatable. But at that point, you're like, well, he's guaranteed 52.4 million if he picks up his player option. Is he really tacking on an extra year just for the right to make sub 18 million? So you have to imagine he's going to get at or near his max in the next contract. And okay, maybe this makes it, this doesn't make it easier to duck the tax this season. You almost need to trade CJ McCollum if you're going to make this trade. So I'd be just interested to watch Jimmy Butler and DeJounte Murray and Trey Murphy and then Zion Williamson together, and Herb Jones, just to see what would happen. Yeah. But I don't know that I understand the logic fully from New Orleans' perspective.
Well, and the key distinction between the recent Harden situation and the potential forthcoming Butler one is that Harden got that deal from a team he wanted to be on. And there's no indication that Butler has any interest in, like, if you're the New Orleans, you've got to recognize the downside of this is like, you just get a guy that's not going to report or reports and is like disruptive again. And you just, in addition to being terrible and expensive, you have a headache too. Like having dealt with all the Zion stuff, like, do you really want to onboard another, like, even if it's for a short amount of time, or even if he's away from the team, it's just like, I don't know. You really got to sell me on New Orleans side of this, because you get it from every other perspective. It's totally logical what we'll talk about here.
If Jimmy says he wants to be in New Orleans, does that make?
Yes, that would. Well, I believe him in this scenario.
I believe him.
Yeah, that makes a difference. It's still like, I guess what you do as New Orleans to justify this, if he wants to be there, is say like, we could be pretty interesting with like Jimmy and Zion. The fit's weird, but it's weird with Zion no matter what. With Jimmy and Zion and Trey Murphy and Herb Jones and whatever, like, that if everybody's healthy, big surprise. We have to use that caveat
on defense. Healthy Jimmy, Herb,
DeJounte. You bumped on it, right? When New Orleans gets thrown out there as a Butler destination, like, that was wild to me.
But we did endeavor to see what a trade would look like. I'm assuming it would involve like 9 teams, but we concocted this 3-team scenario. It is on the screen. Grant, how about you walk us through it?
All right. So we've looped in the Detroit Pistons, because you gotta. And they are getting from the Pelicans. I'll just go through all the assets that Detroit is getting here. CJ McCollum, Jordan Hawkins, the Lakers 26 second, which comes via Miami, a 2030 second, which is the least favorable of Orlando or the Pelicans. That's coming from the Pelicans. A 2031 second, the more favorable of Miami's or Indiana's. So basically McCollum, Hawkins, and a bunch of seconds. Miami's getting Ingram and Jeremiah Robinson Earl. You could swap out a couple of other guys from New Orleans if you wanted to. Javonte Green, I forget who, Daniel Tice could be in there. And then the Pelicans are getting Jimmy Butler, Simone Fontecchio, and Tim Hardaway Jr. Not the only way we can do this. We can maybe talk about the alternatives. But that's basically it. So Pistons, McCollum, Hawkins, Miami's getting Ingram and filler. New Orleans gets Butler, Fontecchio, and Hardaway. So let's walk it through one at a time and give the why is this team doing this? So start with Detroit. What's the justification for Detroit?
They need another ball handler alongside Cade, especially with Jaden Ivey being out, and McCollum can space even when he doesn't have the ball. His contract's not good, but it only runs for one more year. Having him and Tobias Harris on the books seems prohibitive, but again, they both come off the books after next season. So unless you have big plans for off-season flexibility this year, I don't think it kneecaps you. And Jordan Hawkins is a very interesting as a shooter, as someone who's even shown a little bit of on-ball chops. He's going to give you nothing defensively. So that's something to consider. You're basically getting 3 seconds and Jordan Hawkins to take on a year and a half of McCollum, which eats up the remainder of your cap space this year.
And McCollum can help you. He can help. He actually, the contract's not great, but he is another ball handler. If you're not going to have Jaden Ivey, and he can shoot it like that. Those are kind of the prerequisites to playing with Cade Cunningham, right?
Right. I wonder if for them, are they the team, as we're going before we go, they're the team I'm most uneasy about with this, because McCollum makes sense, but you're also sending out Tim Hardaway Jr. has been good for you, but he's expiring. And then Simone Fontecchio, not having his best year, but just as a shooter with size, who's not going to submarine your defense. So they're not, it'd be different if it was just, we're getting this to take on McCollum, but it's also to take on McCollum and we're sending out Fontecchio and THJ.
Yeah, I can't decide if I have more reservations for Detroit or New Orleans here, because we talked about the Butler side of it.
So with Miami at this point, weren't you telling me that you were listening to, why don't you relay that about the Jimmy Butler trade value just plummeting?
Well, it's just I can't remember what I said 5 minutes ago.
You told me that you were listening to Warriors plus minus, and that people around the league that were pointing out are shocked at how low the Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, it's gotten to the point where it's it might not be first. Miami might just be cool with does the money come off the books? Yes. It might get to that point. So that's the thinking here, right? Is that Ingram may just come off the books. You don't care about Robinson Earl. Or whoever it winds up being as additional filler. But Ingram is someone that I can see it. I can see the Heat turning Ingram into the best version of himself. I don't know if that's an outdated way to think about Miami. I just think that's a possibility. And he either comes off the books or you probably bring him back at a number that you're happy with. And Miami kind of gets a win-win there because you don't have the Butler opt-in hovering over your head.
Yeah, I think with Miami at the point it's at, this is a really good deal.
It's a win. That. Yeah, I agree.
Look, it's costing you seconds, but Pat Riley and Andy Ellsberg have never treated seconds like they matter anyway. So I actually like it for the Pelicans because you're surrounding questionable fits with shooting. And the other thing is because you're getting off McCollum's money, you now have a bunch of room under the tax where it's still going to be tight, but I think you go from having, what do we have, 30 million that was with McCollum and Hawkins on the books, and now that's going to go to 60 plus. So you factor in Simone Fontecchio, that's let's say you're 60 million below the tax. You can fit Jimmy's max in below the tax, and then it's okay. Where's our first round pick land, and what are we doing from there? So it'd still be tight, but it's at least doable. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the other possible configuration of this deal?
Yeah. So it's basically you would trade CJ McCollum to Detroit, and Detroit, instead of sending Tim Hardaway Jr. and Simone Fontecchio, sends you Tobias Harris, which I don't think Detroit in that. I know CJ McCollum makes more. He's the better fit. I don't think they need additional compensation if they're getting off of Tobias Harris.
Yes. And then if you're New Orleans, it's kind of I'm not sure how we feel about the part of the appeal for New Orleans is Fontecchio is cost controlled and Hardaway's coming off the book. It just feels cleaner.
Yeah, and the other thing, now your books get, okay, you saved a little bit of money next year off next year's books, but it doesn't matter when you're factoring in Jimmy Butler's salary. So how are you ducking the tax while paying Trey Murphy, DeJounte Murray, Zion Williamson, Jimmy Butler, and Tobias Harris next year? That's going to take, and this says nothing of Herb Jones. His money's just not that large. That's where it gets tough. I think if you're the Pelicans and that's the end result of this, you need to hope that you need other moves lined up to duck the tax this year. And then you're probably going to end up making more moves in advance of next season. I personally, if the Pelicans are actually interested in this structure for me feels more sensible for them. But if Detroit says, hey, like, no, we're going to need a first round pick to do this, it kind of falls apart because New Orleans has no business trading their first round picks in any of the coming years.
Right. Especially with Butler being it's a fraught kind of acquisition for a lot of reasons.